if your garment doesn't want to have a visible waistband and you want to finish the skirt on this line with that lowered waistband position, then you still need to finish that edge. And the way that we finish that edge is using a facing. So that facing is stitched to this edge, flipped inside the garment, and it becomes invisible. So it's not a design element, but it's a way that we use to finish a top edge like this. You'll also see facings in necklines and armholes and on oddly shaped hems or other sections of garments. So first of all, I'm going to use this lowered position that we created. So this is 5 centimeters lower from the top edge of our block, and this will be the finished line, the top edge of our facing. So I've folded the paper here and I have enough room to create the front facing. So I've placed it here and I'm tracing along this line, and then I'm tracing down this dart arm. Making sure to keep that smooth curve that you've traced from your block. And now I'm placing this dart arm and this position here in line with the line that I've drawn on, and I'm making sure that the line of my dart is in line with that other side that I've already traced. So if your block is nice and new, you can trace down both arms of your dart so that you can see it on the other side using your tracing wheel. The other thing that you can do is to transfer using a pen to draw on the dart on the back side of your block as well. So weighting it down and then tracing around to the side seam. Okay, now here I have the top edge. I've closed the dart, so it's starting to create that curved shape. And now I'm going to use a 5 centimeter measurement for the length of the facing. And now I'm ready to add my seam allowances. Like the curved waistband, we have a 6 millimeter seam allowance along the top edge, 12 millimeters on the side. Now the seam allowance or not that you put on the bottom depends how you're finishing your garment. If your garment will be finished with a lining, then you need to add a seam allowance to this bottom edge of the facing. If your garment has no lining, then your facing down here doesn't need that extra seam allowance. So we're just going to finish it like this. And on here on the pattern, you will say no seam allowance or overlocking only on this bottom edge. Alrighty, now I'm going to trace the back and then double check the flow through of the side seam before I cut them out. Starting with the back, at the center back, weighting down the pattern. Oops. Again, I thought I was going this way, but remembering the facing is extending down from the top edge. So tracing across from the dart to the center back and down to the end of the dart. Okay, and again, I'm lining up this line here with the arm of the dart. Great. So we're eliminating the value of this dart in creating this shaping along here. And again, we're going down 5 centimeters. The reason we eliminate this section of the dart and we don't just include that in the facing is basically to simplify the pattern, to eliminate the need for that extra bit of sewing, and to eliminate the bulk that is created by having the dart on the outside as well as a dart on the inside. So often with facings, if there are complicated seam allowance or panels, we simplify them down so that the facing is a simpler piece than maybe the outside of the garment is. So I'm going to mark my centre back before I forget, and the side seam. You can see it's very easy to get them confused. And now I'm adding my 12mm seam allowance down the side, 6mm across the top, and another note that I'm only using a pen in order to make it easy for you guys to see in the video. When you're doing your own pattern making, you'll be using a mechanical pencil or a sharpened pencil. Okay, so now I'm going to double check the flow through of my side seam before I finalize this by cutting it out. So placing the stitching, so I'm not placing the seam allowance on top of the seam allowance to check, but I'm placing the stitching line on top of the stitching line and making sure that that is looking pretty good. So my stitching line up here is in line, and my stitching line is in line with that cut edge down the bottom there. Okay, so these guys are ready to cut out and to finish notching and labeling. So it's a folded piece, so we place some pins in it so that it doesn't move around when we cut it, and it maintains its symmetry. Alrighty. We need to transfer the information from the top to the bottom. Open it out and then make sure we've transferred all of our markings across. So we have a notch here. Alrighty. So if this lower edge is not attached, it has no seam allowance, that means we don't need any notches on it. So the notches would only be used to help you connect it to a lower section of the garment like the lining. So for this one, no seam allowance equals no notches. So the same for the back. Now the grain line, we're going to use a line that's perpendicular to that centre back fold or centre front. And we're going to use centre back as the line that we will be perpendicular to for the grain line. The labelling. Just going to finish it off with the notching, and then our pattern pieces have completed. So starting with the centre front. So this notch here completes this seam, this notch completes this seam across the top, and this notch completes this one down the side. And we have one notch at the centre front. Okay, now we've completed our pattern.